All right.
All right. My name is Joe Sensenbrenner. I'm going to have a conversation with Bridget Maniaci, my alder. I live on the Near East Side and have lived here for 31 years. We're at EVP, so you may hear some traffic going by. I have been involved in politics for quite a while and was mayor from 1983 to 1989. I've been involved in quite a few of the aspects of this Overture case, and I'd like to begin by taking maybe 15 minutes or so and talking about how we got to where we are now from my perspective, just things that I've been involved in and things that opinions that I've formed and that sort of thing. I became focused on this area for the first time in about the fall of 2008. I was not part of the 2000 set of negotiations or changes, the 2005 negotiations and changes. Didn't engage or didn't have an effect on that process. But in 2008, in the fall, I was very concerned that the range of opinions, the frustrations that people had, the anger that people had, the different opinions about what needed to be done first, what needed to be done second, were all over the map. And I reached the conclusion that unless there were a more disciplined process, this was going to go on until there was something really troublesome that happened, probably in the courts. The first thing that had to happen was we had to conclude, a few of us, that this was even possible. Is the Overture too big? Does the community have enough money? Is there a way to run this like a business? How many employees might we have? What kind of shows? How does that relate to the mission? If this was impossible, that might suggest some very limited options. So I spent about a year mostly working with Jennifer Post-Tyler at Overture, who is now with Thrive, and subsequently with Stephen Wolf, the principal consultant, as well as Andrew Statz in the mayor's office, to try to answer some of those preliminary questions. We started with the mission of the Overture. The mission of the Overture is rather broad. It's community-based, it's education-based, it takes into account the resident companies, it has great aspirations. And we couldn't therefore come up with, let's run this just as a box that anybody can rent, or let's cut out all of the public outreach and see how it works. We had to try to develop a plan that honored the mission and the role that really began with the Civic Center in the early 70s. So we have a track record of expanding the kind of impact on the arts and on practitioners, young and old, across the city from the early 70s. Taking the mission, we then began to look at alternative budgets. We had to look at the expense structure, the ability to fundraise, and so forth. I first reached the conclusion that this could work in about February of this year. We could fit the pieces together. And there were at least three major things that had to fit together. One, there had to be an operating budget that on a basis in the future, year after year, could work. We had to have a transition set of decisions and arrangements and costs that would be one time that we would have to cover. And we had to resolve the bank issue. Nothing was worth doing in a broader circle until that was resolved. If it couldn't be resolved, all that work would be for nothing. We couldn't go to donors, we couldn't go to the city council, we couldn't go to the arts groups until the bank issue was resolved. I was very involved in discussions with the banks. One of the principal points I made starting in February and March was unless this was resolved in May or very early June, I didn't think the city council and the mayor would have sufficient time to work this through the process. They couldn't wait to reach an agreement on the debt until August or September, and then we began to put together a plan. So we had very, very earnest discussions, which culminated in May of this year. The documents took some time to draft, and we ultimately announced a resolution with the banks on about the 10th of June. The banks took a major reduction in the obligation that they felt under the law they were entitled to. As part of the resolution, the city contributed nothing, and by that I mean there were many articles in the newspaper and many people assumed that the city owed money to take care of one of what are called firewalls. If the operations were insufficient to cover the debt, certain parties agreed to cover that debt, and it was on the basis of the bank's confidence in the operations as well as the firewalls that they loaned the money originally and made a separate transaction in 2005. The city's position was, we don't owe anything. There were certain negotiations, there were certain collateral decisions made in 2008, and we don't owe anything. That is still technically unresolved. The banks have decided that they're not going to go after the city, and if all of this works out, will likely resolve all of the matters that relate to the finances in the way that has been proposed. But part of the negotiation process was the city to say, we're not putting any money into the pot. All of the money that goes to the banks is going to have to be raised elsewhere.
Hold on a sec. Let me hit pause.